I just sent you a video to the whole entire thing.
Is the main person that is accusing everybody? Or like, what's the main group that's accusing?
The witch hunters.
The
Puritans.
Well, yes, this is the Puritans, but which of the Puritans keep accusing others?
The guys with starts at the end D. I can't remember.
Putnam?
Putnam, yeah.
Putnam.
Is it P?
I want to say John Putnam.
Yes.
Well, have you guys... There's a certain group that keeps accusing other people. It's the teenage girls. They keep having fits.
Younger women.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if I was I think anybody I would say they're wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, mostly.
And that's why they called it with the period.
And then Mrs. Beasley's age, you would have most likely had a good chance of being accused of being a witch.
That's a witch.
Yeah, they can shape shift.
Not all of them.
Okay.
That was it.
Hold on. Discuss amongst yourselves.
No. You can go do that to Maya.
Yeah.
Shut up.
No, it's not.
No.
Yeah, go.
Oh, wait, no, it's hanged actually if you get hanged.
It's hungry. I
already got pissed at somebody in last hour, and I punched him in the face.
You punched him in the face?
Yes.
Would be like
He pissing me off. I punched him in the face, and he threw something at me, and I punched him in the head.
Good job. Right now. Yeah. It's hungry.
Hanged. It's hanged.
Hungry.
Hungered.
Hang him.
Hungered.
Bridget tells the magistrate she has nothing to do with the girl's torments.
It's Karen.
Bridget Bishop is found guilty and hangs on June 10th. She's the first accused witch to die. It's a key moment, visible on the map.
Do you see a pause? There's nothing new appearing on your screen, right? There's an important transition point here. There's a pause for about 3 weeks after Bridget Bishop is executed on June 10th. There's something significant going on there.
Beginning to doubt?
The map suggests the authorities are concerned. The judge in charge of the special court trying witches, William Stoughton, is a hardliner. He's in favor of spectral evidence.
What spectral evidence?
if one person can see it, then and not the other people can't see it, they are the people that see it that is taken as like that is true.
Yeah, so people could say, I had a dream that she was a witch. They'd be like,
oh my god.
yeah, but you could tell them all about it. Oh, I saw her do this. Blah, blah. And they would have to believe it. They'd have to take it as evidence.
But the governor of the colony wants a second opinion and asks the Puritan church establishment to weigh in. Is spectral evidence acceptable?
The court will go to the Massachusetts ministers for advice. They're out of their depth. They're not entirely certain how to adjudicate the witchcraft. They've never had an epidemic of this size. They really need to know what actually they're meant to be looking for.
The ministers in Boston say, well, we don't like the evidence because it's spectral, but on the other hand, we know there are witches, so go after them.
Because they was there.
Spectral evidence now has the church's blessing. The bureaucracy of death moves into high gear. Making matters worse, Judge Stoughton permits huge crowds inside the courts.
You'd have had a terrified person standing about to be examined, and then you would have pews and pews and pews, people lining the walls, waiting to see what was going to happen.
Why do you seem to act witchcraft before us by the motion of your body, which seems to have influence upon the afflicted?
I know nothing of it.
Hunting witches has become a spectator sport.
And it's been argued that one of the reasons that the accusations become so fantastical with the afflicted girls fainting, screaming, is that the people coming and wanting to see the performance of this behavior encourage the afflicted girls basically to play it up because of the attention.
Ben Ben says the map reveals another key factor gleaned from the 300-year-old documents.
So it starts what you might call phase 2. We're going to get this spread out further across eastern Massachusetts. And that's because the word has kind of gotten out that if you confess, you will not be brought to trial, at least immediately. But to authenticate your confession, not only have to describe the kind of witchcraft you're doing, you have to name someone. And they name 2 or 3 people.
If you confessed, you were spared the rope, but you were expected to turn in someone else. The outbreak map illustrates how the court system creates a feedback loop of paranoia and violence.
It's Samuel Parris who's at the center of it all. He says this was a plague-like experience.
It is a summer of pure terror. Neighbor accuses neighbor. Family members turn on each other. And on July 19th, 5 are hanged, including 70-year-old church member Rebecca Nurse. And the number of men, women, and children in prison keeps growing.
The jails of Massachusetts are full to bursting. There have never been this many witchcraft accusations in the entire rest of Massachusetts history.
Blacksmiths are busy forging shackles to restrain the accused.
All right, you're gonna help me because I don't know that I can even do this myself.
One of the accused witches in prison is Elizabeth Peterson's long-ago relative, John Proctor.
Was he jailed like this and probably shackled as well?
Absolutely. This is what it would have looked like for John Proctor the whole time he was in prison.
For his wife Elizabeth, things are even worse. She's pregnant.
Uh-oh.
Also jailed is Dorothy Good, the 5-year-old daughter of Sarah Good, one of the first accused.
Why did they put witches in these shackles?
They put them in shackles because iron has magical qualities, they thought. It could stop witchcraft and evil from happening. So as long as you're shackled like this, you couldn't hurt anybody if you were a witch.
On July 19th, Dorothy becomes an orphan. Her mother is also found guilty and hanged. In prison, John Proctor's 16-year-old son William is tortured. Proctor writes a desperate petition to the church. The courts are rushing to judgment. Torture is being used to win confessions.
And so this is going to come up here?
Volunteer Jack Kaplan demonstrates how it might have happened.
Here's what he says. My son, William Proctor, when he was examined, because he would not confess that he was guilty when he was innocent, they tied him neck and heels till the blood gushed out of his nose.
Oh my gosh.
We humbly beg that you would have these magistrates changed, hoping you may be the means of saving the shedding our innocent bloods.
This is his last-ditch plea when he writes to the ministers in late July, asking them to use the proper rule of evidence. He even asks for a change in venue. Can we move the proceedings to Boston? But his pleas fall on deaf ears.
On August 5th, the special court preserves its nearly 100% conviction rate, finding John Proctor and his wife Elizabeth guilty. 2 weeks later, Proctor finds himself riding in a cart to be executed. It takes him and the 4 other accused witches through the streets of Salem.
There must have been a great crowd. People would have been all along the route and maybe following it to see what happened when they get to the gallows.
A huge crowd gathered to watch the accused die at a site somewhere in this town. They were about to witness the darkest hour in the history of Puritan New England. The Salem witch executions would have been horrific.
So those hangings back then were short distance hanging?
How off the ground do you think they...
Dr. Ralph Riviello is a specialist in forensic medicine.
Unlike what we know nowadays about hangings, where it's done to break the person's neck, to have a merciful death, this is far from it.
So it's not a quick death?
No, it's not. It's actually strangulation.
Before Proctor's own execution, he'll watch 4 others hang. The most shocking of which is a Puritan minister George Burroughs.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Burroughs stuns the crowd with his final words.
He manages to say the Lord's Prayer while on the ladder. The effect of that is hard for us to understand, but to a 17th century New Englander, a witch was unable to utter the Lord's Prayer.
But deliver us from evil.
The prayer, spoken from the hangman's ladder, is nearly too much for the crowd.
There will almost be an attempt to intervene and to stop the execution.
Instead, another Puritan minister, Cotton Mather, tells the crowd that reciting the Lord's Prayer is a diabolical trick.
Mather will remind them that this is a meaningless act and that this is a very dangerous man, and the execution will proceed.
Cotton Mather said, even the devil can be disguised as an angel of light just because he looks innocent and he's not. And then the hangman pushes Reverend Burroughs off the ladder to strangle.
So that rope blocks the carotid arteries, jugular vein, the trachea, the windpipe. That period is followed by convulsions or shaking, seizure activity.
The final spasms of agony could have been seen as evidence of witchcraft.
I'm sure a lot of people in the crowd felt it was the demons or the witches leaving their body. Right.
John Proctor would have witnessed all of that, and was soon thereafter followed his death.
Finally, John Proctor, as unlikely a witch as could be, is walked up the hangman's ladder.
Get him up the ladder here. Here. You're gonna get the noose over his head. It's just a simple slip. Now, Ralph, what is it? Turned off the ladder? Is that the expression?
Turned off the ladder, yes.
Turn him off the ladder.
This is the place where Christian martyrs had been executed, where perhaps the best and the worst of Puritan New England had faced each other. The historians believe that if they can find the site, it will write a final chapter in the Salem story. For years, legend had it that the witches were executed at the highest point in town, a spot named Gallows Hill. A 19th century historian, Sidney Purley, suggested the location was lower down and closer to town. The historians agree. Gallows Hill would have been too steep for a cart and too far to attract a big enough crowd.
You need to transport people from the city jail outside to some elevated place where the executions can be seen as an example to everyone.
Visible, but not in someone's backyard.
I equate it to the crucifixion of Jesus, which took place outside the walls of Jerusalem at Golgotha, which is this rugged hillside.
There was one document, which was the questioning of Rebecca Ames.
Marilyn Roach has made a discovery in the 300-year-old documents. It's a courtroom interrogation of another accused witch, Rebecca Ames. She may have seen the hangings.
She was asked if she was at the execution. She was at the house below the hill. She saw a few folk being executed. The house below the hill.
House below the hill.
So,
By studying old maps, Marilyn thinks she's identified the house below the hill, where Rebecca Ames might have seen the hanging.
19-1.
Number 15 and 17.
And he's number 19.
Number 19. Well,
so the house is
it's a
here.
laundromat.
Yeah.
Rebecca is being taken to court along the main road. At the same time, the crowd is gathered to watch John Proctor and the other accused witches hang.
Her guards, I think, didn't want to miss the excitement, so they put her in one of the houses in the vicinity, where she then observed people being hanged.
In the 17th century, there were only a couple of houses on the street. Their map suggests that in 1692, this house would have had a clear view of high ground.
Right over there, straight.
But today, any view is obscured by trees. Is this really the long-lost hanging site? Behind an auto body repair shop? Off a busy street? Ben and Marilyn show their calculations to graphic artist Edmund Earl.
So you're saying that you have records that there's one of these houses where you could actually see where the hangings would have been?
Yes.
We were most interested whether from this house, what you could see here.
Edmund has taken the old maps and Ben's calculations and built a three-dimensional view of a 17th century world.
There's a testimony from Rebecca Ames, who was arrested in Boxford that morning. They asked her, did you see what was going on? And she said she was in the house below the hill, somewhere along here, and she could see folks being hanged.
Is it possible to see what the street view would be like if you were looking out the front door of this house?
This is the house Marilyn and Ben had visited earlier. Edmund zooms his virtual camera back through the centuries.
So if we go way in, we look up. Oh, that's good.
And there you see it.
The trees are now stripped away, and the view of the high ground is clear. The team is almost certain they have located the long-lost hanging site.
This is the vantage point from right in front of the house.
Yep.
There's people up there being hanged.
Exactly.
A three-dimensional graphic is one thing. Now they want to investigate the site itself. The location they identified now sits in the middle of a suburban development.
So we must be close.
Yep.
We're in someone's backyard here.
But it looks like it might be the place, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And look, there's a high ledge right there at the top.
The high ledge would have been visible from the street below. This is the hanging site of the Salem witches.
So we might be on the spot. For 300 plus years, it hadn't been marked.
Hello.
Tom Brophy, a retired fireman, grew up in this house, where stories had been passed for generations.
When we were little kids, my parents and some of the neighbors used to say, watch this land over here, and someday it'll be very important. Witches, you know?
Your family always knew.
They had heard the rumors that the original site was right in this general area.
Wow.
If this is the hanging site, are the remains of the Salem witches buried here? One 17th century book reported that the dead had been buried nearby. The witches were considered unclean, forbidden Christian burial, and dumped in a mass grave.
He was dragged to a hole or grave between the rocks, about 2 foot deep.
Now stretch the tape out to that tree down there.
Geologist Peter Sablock is helping the team search for the rock crevice where the remains were thrown. The ground-penetrating radar he's brought fires electromagnetic pulses thousands of times a second. They bounce back when they hit different soil and rock layers to reveal what's hidden below the surface.
As we're doing some readings, will this basically show us if there was some body buried?
What it would show us is disturbed ground.
And this is showing basically very little soil.
Very, very
yeah,
little.
yeah.
The bedrock lies close to the surface, except in one place.
You can see the whole stream.
You know,
This is the crevice.
that is the crevice.
That is the best candidate.
The dead were buried here, but the mass grave was shallow and never meant to be permanent.
But none of those fractures extend deep enough to inter a body for 300 years. There is virtually no chance that there are any remains at all. It's just too close to the surface here.
But that may not be where the Salem story ends. Legend has it that some of the bodies, including John Proctor's, were stolen in the darkness after the executions.
It all kind of culminates with these people being hung, but we don't really hear what happened afterwards.
Researcher Kelly Daniels and Tad Baker are both fascinated by a legend that John Proctor's family had stolen his body from the mass grave at the hanging site Is that story true? And if so, where had they reburied him?
I've always been interested in these family traditions in families like John Proctor about coming to claim their loved ones and give them proper burial.
Yeah, it's definitely a detective story. I think it's a solvable mystery.
When she arrived at her new job at the Peabody Historical Society, Kelly discovered the research notes of a Salem investigator from the past. In the 1800s, William Upham had interviewed surviving relatives of John Proctor.
He began talking to Proctor descendants, one of which mentions her aunt pointing to a spot on a rocky hill on this 15-acre plot and saying that was where our ancestor of witchcraft notoriety was buried.
Modern tools allow for the next steps in a 200-year-old investigation.
The best image is this satellite image that doesn't have too many trees, where you can actually see the property boundaries pretty clearly.
Even the stone walls there. And that X marks the spot right there.
X marks the spot.
The location is on land that Proctor once owned, off a main road from Peabody, near the local high school.
This is the boundary line, right?
So really marking that northeast corner of John Proctor's property.
Yep.
John Proctor had been found guilty of witchcraft, a crime worse than murder. Removing his body for reburial would have been hazardous.
This element of secrecy is almost purposeful on the part of the family members, at least directly after the witch trials.
And John Proctor was buried in the rocks. Right up in here is the northeast corner.
We don't really hear what happened like to the families who had to take the bodies of their loved ones out of a crevice and by dark of night bring them up a brook into a quiet corner of their family's land. So we can imagine his adult sons coming up Proctor's Brook, maybe taking some sort of wagon to carry their father's body up this hill and interring him in kind of a faraway corner of their land.
Right.
This is the location William Upham had guessed was John Proctor's final resting place. Tad and Kelly agree.
You know, it all makes perfect sense. It all fits up.
Unfortunately, a school was built nearby in the 1970s, and the ground heavily disturbed.
You can see the stone wall is just completely destroyed up in here. So here's the question. I mean, what are the chances of Proctor actually still being here?
I think based on the fact that it's been disturbed for utilities and construction up here, I think they're pretty slim.
But pretty clearly, this was the spot where the family said they brought John Proctor.
John Proctor's body had been carried here in secrecy and darkness. A political cover-up had further hidden the true story of the Salem witches. But 3 centuries later, the historians may finally have answers to some of the witch trial's biggest mysteries. Why had the young girls acted so strangely that year, having violent fits and accusing so many others?
There is a modern phenomenon which is called conversion disorder, which is when your body expresses emotional stress through physical symptoms.
Some of the accusers, like Ann Putnam, may have been doing the bidding of older adults such as her father, but others were refugees from the Indian Wars and worked as servants in a life of obedience, fear, and occasional violence.
They're literally terrified. They're not faking when they're screaming, yelling, having convulsions, fits.
I go along with the theory that some of it is conversion disorder or hysteria, it used to be called, where if someone is afraid enough, they can convulse or think that they have been wounded.
Although it may never be possible to know with certainty, for these young accusers, pointing fingers may have been a reaction to the stress of daily life.
My take is that the afflicted girls at Salem were living in a moment of incredibly rigid class and gender hierarchies, and the only way that their culture had to express that tension, to let that steam off, was in the form of a witch trial.
And perhaps the biggest question of all, why had the accusations spread so fast, like a virus? The Massachusetts judges allowed spectral evidence and encouraged citizens to accuse their fellow villagers. They are at the very heart of what makes the Salem witch scare unique.
These are experienced judges. They've served in cases of witchcraft before where they'd let people go. So what caused things to change in 1692?
The head of the special court trying the witches was a hardline former preacher, Judge William Stoughton. He's buried in an ornate tomb in Dorchester Cemetery. Elizabeth Peterson is visiting the tomb with Stacy Schiff and Tad Baker.
There he is in the middle of Dorchester. Oh my gosh.
This is it. This is it.
Stoughton signed the death warrant for 18 witches, including Elizabeth's relative, John Proctor.
Why do you think Stoughton was like this? He really clearly believes fervently that he is doing a public service.
For Stoughton, this is a holy war. Indians are laying siege to the frontier. Satan is assaulting from within. And the authorities need to show England they can take a firm hand.
He sees that Massachusetts needs moral reformation. We need to get back into church. We need to get out of the taverns, and that's how we're going to save the colony.
On September 22nd, 8 more witches are hanged. But by late October, growing criticism of the trials leads the governor to close the special court and begin emptying the jails of suspected witches. One of the judges on the court, Samuel Sewell, will later apologize for his role in the hangings. And years later, Chief Accuser Ann Putnam will also say she is sorry. But until his death in 1701, William Stoughton remains unrepentant.
After the trials were over, he was asked, "What do you think about your role?" And he says, "I never had any question about it. I was doing God's work."
And finally, where had the witch trial victims been so publicly hanged? Here, on a hillside in Salem, Massachusetts. On July 19th, 2017, the site was recognized with a memorial built just below the ledge where the accused witches were hanged.
The shadow from Proctor's Ledge may be long and enduring, but it does not obscure us from that fuller understanding of our common humanity.
The memorial is gratifying for the historians who helped find the hanging site.
History is about place. I think the narrative comes to, in this place, a kind of ennobling conclusion, because these are people who transcend the rest of us.
If people can be reminded of the real story, it should help, I hope, and do honor to the people who suffered.
Those who escaped the hangman suffered too. Elizabeth Proctor survived because she was pregnant, but she spent the rest of her life fighting to clear her name and win restitution for herself and a son she called John. As many as 100 million Americans may be descended from those accused of witchcraft in Salem.
And when you look at these 19, the thing that makes them unusual isn't their personalities, but the one thing they shared in common was the idea that truth is more important than even life itself.
The rocky ledge where the accused witches were hanged today is a memorial to those martyrs and a tribute to the many historians who would not let their story die.
How wonderful. Okay, we're not going to start the movie right now because that would be like 10 minutes of the movie. There's my mom. But I did want to show you guys something. Ways they used to figure out if you were a witch or not. That I think is interesting. So obviously there's the swimming test. Can the witch float? If that means they float, that means the water is rejecting them because they're so unholy.
So if they don't float, they're a witch.
But if you sink,
Then-
you drown and die. But oh, you were innocent. Whoopsies. Yes, Kyle.
So they put rocks on. How did they put something on their feet when they threw them off?
No, they just strip them, throw them in there.
So then they sink, but over time their body would just float up because of the stuff in their
But if you basically,
body.
if you didn't know how to swim, you're innocent. If you knew how to swim, you're a witch.
That doesn't make any sense.
And then they're gonna kill you anyway. You know?
So if you're alive, if you get out of there alive, you're dead.
Yeah.
And
if you die, you're dead. So.
Well, obviously, if you die, you're dead.
Yeah.
I mean, if
You're
I.
dead, you're dead. Unalive.
The prayer test. This is what they were talking about with the one priest or preacher, whatever they call it, where he said the Lord's Prayer perfectly. They would basically test these people to see if they could say a prayer or something from the Bible flawlessly. Which at this moment, is everybody educated and able to read? No. So really, the only people that could do that perfectly were the priests, which.
and plus he did it perfectly, and he still got the cold.
Because it was a trick.
Put your finger in there.
The touch test. I like this one because I was talking about the young girls. Personally, I think the young girls were full of shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh
wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Wait, that means mine cancels out. Mine just cancels out. Yes.
So we just leave it on for Miss Beasley.
I'm free. Anyway.
For everyone that missed
I think they're full of it, you know.
we get one.
So the touch test was that if the people that have been like bewitched, the ones that are being bewitched are like, oh, the witch is taking control of me. If they touched the witch, they would like convulse and like go crazy and screaming and all of that. So of course these young girls were like, ah, and like freaking out every time they touched the witch. You know?
If you said another touch word, I should get all mine taken off.
That's not the rule.
Yep.
Witch cakes. Has anyone ever heard of witch cakes?
Cupcakes?
So they would make these cakes out of the witch's urine.
Oh.
They would literally take her pee. They would mix it with, what was it? Like just nasty things. Ash? Where does it say? Mix it with rye meal and ashes and make it into a cake. And then they would feed it to a dog to see if the dog would like, if something would happen to the dog.
Of course, the dog
And if
wouldn't
something
eat
bad
it.
happened to the dog.
Something bad obviously would happen to the dog. Probably
It's
not.
piss. Or
Just
pee.
pee.
Yeah, but did you say ashes?
Yeah. So? People used to eat like sawdust. It's fine.
Oh yeah.
In Egypt, they use it. They use charcoal, I think it was.
Yeah. People, you can eat anything. It's just wood.
It's just.
You know, if you get dogs some onions, it'll shut down their liver.
Okay.
So with the
If
chocolate
something
will
bad
kill
happened
them.
to the dog, that means they're a witch. If nothing happens to the dog,
It's a dog.
they're not a witch.
It's dead.
So that one was probably a better test to say, I guess.
None of these are good tests,
Yeah.
Levi.
Well, for the so-called witch.
Okay, the witch's
I love
mark.
how you stopped doing tallies.
The witch's mark test. So basically, they would look for any sort of mark on your body, and if that would be like where the devil touched you. So if you had
stretch marks all over.
Yeah, if you had a weird looking birthmark or a weird looking
your
mole,
foot.
or just a mole in general, that could be seen as the devil's mark, you know?
It might.
Or if you have like a third nipple, which are very common, my friends. Harry Styles has like 5 nipples, okay? Very common.
No, you should send me a picture of all 5 of them.
Harry Styles has extra nipples.
What? Hold on.
It's totally a normal thing. So, of course, when they strip people naked, they're gonna find some sort of mark on their body, you know?
It'd be abnormal not to.
5 nipples?
Exactly.
Five
If any of you have a birthmark,
Where's
my
the-
devil has touched you.
I have a
You-
birthmark right here.
I have a birthmark right
You
here.
have to.
It only shows
Do
up
what?
when I get really upset and really angry, and it looks like a strawberry. I have one on my foot, and it looks like
I have a white.
Let me see the
mole
video.
on my
I'll
finger.
send it to you.
Well, it's not white, but it's just a bump in it.
My birthmark, like,
Come on.
when it's hot.
Scrabbing on my leg.
I haven't heard of the pricking and scratching test before. But basically, if they couldn't find a mark on you, they
Incantations.
would scratch you, and if you didn't bleed, you were a witch.
Whoa, what?
So they just go whoop, and then if you didn't bleed, you're a witch. You go, whoop. A warlock.
I'm gonna say one word and one.
It's a warlock. It's a warlock. A male would be a warlock. A woman is a witch. A male is a warlock.
This charging. This test involves forcing the accused witch to verbally order the devil to let the possessed victim come out of their fit or
Hairstyle only has 2 nipples.
No, he has 2 extra nipples.
He's got a lot of nipples.
He's got 4. Just look at pictures.
Harry Styles, are you just looking at pictures? Google Harry Styles nipples.
That's gonna be so weird on camera.
What is now in my search history? Now I'm in my parents' phone.
You can just delete your search history. Brian.
Okay, so the
Brian,
dispensations,
delete
they
your
would
search
just
history.
say, release Annabelle from the devil's control, and then if Annabelle started acting different, then it's like, oh, she's a witch.
Okay, where are the nipples?
I did spit.
All right.
I did the nipples.
It goes.
Bro. Bro.
He has multiple.
Bro.
Nipple.
What?
Nipple.
Ha! That's a mole.
They're like, they're so small.
Nope. That's the devil's mark.
Just imagine Mr. Best walks in.
Yeah, a butterfly. It's a butterfly. Steven, you should do that. You get a butterfly on you.
Styles shocks fans after saying his 4 nipples are the best thing about dating. He admits he's got 4 nipples.
Can you stop rubbing my leg?
Okay, anyway.
That is weird.
Austin, help me. No.
Like the money and meth.
You want to see?
Harry Styles has multiple
I ran into a
nipples.
tree. And now you got slashed like right here.
And then I was thinking for our project for this lesson, I think we'll go through like a pre-written mock trial of a witch trial.
We can make witch cake.
Let's not make witch cake.
No, the actual witch cake you'd buy in the store. The actual witch cake you can buy in the store. the actual witch.
Are we gonna like?
The devil's chocolate.
I wanna get the person with the main amount of money.
The devil's cake. I can make a devil's cake at my house. They're really good to eat. Those things are real good.
What's your favorite? I want to be the main person.
I shit on you.
I would be really good at that.
Okay, so I do want to go through, for sure I want to go through like a pre-written one where you guys have roles, like we're going to do like a play kind of type deal.
I like
then
that.
I was thinking we could also discuss and like come up with our own sort of trial. Not sure quite how that would work yet, but that is my idea. Any objections?
No.
Yes.
If you
I
get.
want to be the guy who accuses people.
I want to get a guy who pisses
Hold
the
on,
cake.
I asked any
We can make devil's cake. We can make some devil's cake. That stuff's
so
good.
we're all in agreement? Fun idea.
Yep.
Devil's cake.
Pisses the cake.
And we can make for.
Did you say the P word?
Yeah, I already marked it.
Okay.
Can we make the devil's cake?
Huh?
Can we make a devil's cake? Those things are good.
Devil's food cake?
Yes.
We should do that instead of.
I'll have my grandmother
do
cook
an
them.
angel's food.
No, there's
If you
white.
eat angel's food cake and you start having convulsions, you're a witch.
No, it should be we have angels and devil cake, right? And whichever one you like better is what you are.
What we are. Devil's food cake and it is, yeah, it's real good.
We'll
Chocolate.
make it work. We got this.
Carrot cake is good as
Where
well.
can we go cook?
I like carrot cake. It's good.
Spice cake.
Here.
Can I see that?
Can we just have like the accuser just
Can
slay
we
the
steal the
witches?
tip for a little bit? No.
I'll be the witch. I'll let no, just scream like cake.
I can bring my great grandmother here and she can help us make a cake.
We are done for today. I would. You guys did put the desks back right.
Well, tried.
Thank you for doing that. That's gonna be messed up for a while.
Can I turn on the lights?
No! Levi, no!
I'm gonna go pick up my.
No, close your eyes.
Wait, just one?
Can I put my bones
This
in the
one
jar?
or this?
Ah.
Either one.
Mr. Beasley said to do this one. Keep it off.
Okay, can you guys look around and pick up any trash on the floor because this room's messy.
Steven.
Is this someone?
Hello.
If it looks
Hello, Johnny.
That does not sound like Johnny from The Shining.
Hey, Austin.
It's Johnny.
It's Johnny.
Oops. So many people.
I don't think so.
Mrs. Beasley, what in? I think this census keeps getting a raise. What if we have a Google Doc?
Nope, I'm out.
Alright, that's it. Let's.
And then only